start with the endorsement. I mean, you just picked up the endorsement of the highest-ranking African-American in Congress 3 days before the primary here. What do you hope to accomplish with that? What message do you hope that sends to voters?
Well, I hope it sends the message that Jim Clyburn tried to send, which was that I've always been with the community. I've been a strong supporter. I've been consistent. I've worked with South Carolina for a long, long time. During the Great Recession, we were able to pour in $500 million in here, and just in the Charleston area, creating 1 in 11 jobs in this state come from the port. We've invested a lot in that. And so I've been deeply involved with the community here just because of Fritz Hollings and my work here over the years. And to have Jim Clyburn give such a full-throated endorsement, there's 240 electeds in this state and leaders in the state have endorsed me, 95% of whom are African Americans. But I think, and you know this state as well as anyone, I think he may be the most respected person in the state. And as Jim said, South Carolina's launched presidencies, and I'm looking forward to the launch.
Tuesday night, the 10th debate. You seemed keen on mixing it up a bit more last night. A lot of folks have said it's been your best debate performance so far. What took so long?
Well, you know, I've been reluctant to criticize other people. In other words, my record is fair game, and while I was viewed as the front runner this whole time, everybody went after me. But then I found out, like, for example, when Bernie started talking about how everybody's embracing Barack now, like he's their best buddy. Well, Bernie in 2012 said he was a great disappointment, thought he should be primaried. You know, people don't know that.
But he campaigned for Barack Obama.
Well, he said he wanted to primary Barack Obama in the middle as we're about to approach, and not one incumbent president who's had a serious primary has ever gone on to win. And so, come on, this wasn't an idle throwaway line I campaigned for. He said he's been a great disappointment, he's been weak, and somebody should primary him. And then, you know, I find that, you know, he talks about his, you know, criticizes other people on their records. The fact that, you know, his record on dealing with assault weapons, his record on dealing with the Brady bill. He voted 5 times against it in the waiting periods. He voted to give the only major industry an exemption from being able to be sued, the gun industry, the gun manufacturers. And so it was about, you know, everybody who finally gets to be looked at. Now they're beginning to look at Bernie, and he's a good guy, but we have real disagreements on a number of issues. And
you just mentioned guns. A few minutes ago, Michael Bloomberg tweeted that the legacy of Bernie Sanders' pro-gun agenda created the conditions for the Mother Emanuel shooting. We are sitting just a short walk away from Mother Emanuel. Do you think that's too far? Do you think that's accurate?
Now look, if we had what I had proposed, a 5-day waiting period, after you apply for a gun, you have to wait you can't get it unless you pass the background check. And if after 5 days you don't pass it, they don't get back to you with information, you could purchase the gun. I don't think you should be able to do it at all until you pass the background check. But Bernie insisted that that was too long a waiting period, and he voted to get it down to a single day. And now Jim Clyburn's moved what they call that the Charleston loophole.
Right.
That white supremacist would not have been able to have that gun, would not have been able to purchase it, if in fact there had been a 5-day waiting period. I'm not saying Bernie is responsible for the deaths, but that Charleston loophole does in fact allow him to get the gun within the time frame he got it.
You said something last night, and you just mentioned your former boss, Barack Obama. And you said on the debate stage that you'd had a conversation with him recently. And I know you don't talk about your private conversations with the president. But why hasn't he at least sent up a smoke signal to let folks know that Joe Biden is his guy in this fight?
Well, look, number one, I asked him early on not to endorse.
You regret that?
No, because I think, look, from the very beginning, as you know, I've been viewed, he's vice president, he thinks this is his. He thinks he's entitled. He thinks he's the guy who thinks it's automatically his. That's been the sort of the hit on me from the beginning. If he had endorsed me, it would have been a double hit. Biden feels entitled. I have to earn this myself. What I did, I called Barack because I wanted to make sure that I didn't want to speak for him about his comments that Bernie made that Barack Obama said the same thing about the Cuban leadership. He didn't. It was a totally different context. And I wanted to make sure I never speak for the president. I never say what he said, but that's the context in which I called him. And he made it absolutely clear that he has never embraced any dictators in terms of, he's acknowledged that there's some things they've done, but then he's gone on to condemn their activities, their practices, and they were dictators. And that was the point I was trying to clear up, because Bernie was trying to say, well, all I did was what Barack did. Well, it's not what Barack did.
Did he also give you any campaign pointers during the call? Any tips?
We always talk. I always listen to him. We give each other tips.
You've also said on the trail a number of times, I've heard you say this, that this is a battle for the soul of this nation.
It really is.
It is also starting to seem as if this is perhaps a battle for the soul of your party.
I think that's true.
If you were not the nominee, what does that then say about the Democratic Party?
It says to me that we have moved away from our roots, our basic rationale for being in existence as a party. Woodrow Wilson once said, a party is worth no more than that for which it stands. We have always stood for a multi-ethnic, multi-racial, multi-dimensional party. And we have always, my basis of support has always been working class folks who are white and black, and the black community, and high school educated people who just deserve a shot. I really do believe, and I shouldn't say that. I've said it many times, and that is that, ordinary people can do extraordinary things if they're given a chance, and they shouldn't be limited by their zip code, their background, their race, their religion, and I think that what's at stake here is this notion that somehow, like for example, a revolution, people are looking for results. They're looking to get things done. They're looking to build on what Barack and I did in our administration. They're looking for a health care that in fact is affordable, available, and can get passed and get done now. They're looking for access to education, early education. We now have all kinds of data we didn't have 15 years ago about if you start a child in school when they're 3 years old instead of waiting to kindergarten, they increase exponentially their prospects of succeeding. We've learned that there's a lot of things that we can do that in fact impact on, for example, HBCUs. HBCUs have been the basis of the ability of African Americans to get off the ground to begin with. And they're underfunded significantly. They don't have endowments. That's why I want to spend all this money, $70 billion over the next 10 years, on endowing them with the capacity to compete for the kind of contracts that build their infrastructure, their intellectual infrastructure, whether it's specialties in cyberspace or metallurgy or whatever. They don't have that kind of endowment to be able to compete for those things.
Why do you think that Bernie Sanders has been able to convince so many people, especially so many young people, that he's their guy?
Well, Bernie has done a very good job of working this for the last 5 or 6 years. And, and it's really appealing when you're in a situation where you're struggling to pay for your college tuition, when you're having difficulty in dealing with being able to get health care, et cetera, just to promise you everything. But I think people are starting to now, that's why last night he finally began once again to acknowledge what his health care plan was going to cost. He sold half of it. He said the employer is going to pay 7.5% more, but guess what? You're going to pay 7.5% more too. You're going to double what you pay in withholding tax for Social Security, and that only gets you a quarter of the way there. You know what I mean? So I think now that people are going to start to look at that he has now risen to the place where his polling numbers are better. They're going to now go look at like you did with me. Every major vote I cast for 40 years has been looked at. I mean, not figuratively, literally. It's legitimate. And so I think that as people begin to look at what's going on, they're going to have a slightly different view. And look, the idea that there's going to be this revolution. Americans aren't looking for revolution. They're looking for progress. They're looking for, tell me how you're going to help me with my health care. Tell you to make me safer. Tell you how we're going to do it. But, Mr. Vice
President, some seem keen on a revolution.
Well, some do, but look at the numbers. We always talk about this great increase in participation. He's nowhere near, he's not going to come anywhere near generating the kind of participation of young folks that Barack did in 2008. There's no evidence of that yet. Now, I hope they do participate because they're the most informed generation in American history. And they're now getting involved. If they voted in the same percentage as people voted, as the average person voted in 2016, we would have had 5.2 million more votes. But it is not at the exclusion of everything else. There's a lot of young people out there who are supportive of a more, I won't say rational, a more practical path to get things done.
Bernie Sanders won Nevada, won New Hampshire, came in a close second in Iowa. He's expected to finish second or third here in South Carolina. If he does, how can you then continue to make the claim that he's not electable?
Because I talked to all the people who are in those states that we have to win. Find me someone running for the Senate in North Carolina who wants him to campaign for him. Find somebody in Texas who wants him to campaign for him. Find me somebody in Georgia who wants him to campaign for them. Bernie is listed as, Bernie's not a Democrat. I mean, he's run as Democrat, and but even when you list last night, when they listed the people on the, what the registration is, listed independent. So, I mean, this is the idea that somehow we have moved away from the traditional base of the Democratic Party, I think is one of the reasons why we lost. And I do hope more young people vote. I think you're going to all be surprised at how they vote. There's a lot of people who are fervently for Bernie at vote any cost kind of thing. This is their only person. And I compliment him on the fact that he's kept that going since the last election. And, like, for example, Bernie talks about the fact that, or his people talk about the fact that whoever goes into the convention with the most delegates should be the nominee. Was that the case when Hillary went in? I mean, it's like all these epiphanies are occurring here. You know what I mean?
Why do you think it is? Why do you think he's talking about changing the goalposts?
Because that's the only way he's likely to make it. Look, I mean...
What do you think should happen?
I think should happen, you play by the rules. You go in there and you have to get over 1,900 votes. I mean, that's what you have to do. That's the deal. And the idea that all of a sudden there's a moral dilemma here, if that doesn't happen, well, where was his morality and the moral dilemma when they didn't do that for Hillary? Come on. I mean, look, I just happen to think that, consistency on matters that have basic fundamental principles behind them are important. It's a little bit like, Bernie talking about guns. Bernie, is going to make the nation safer. Well, Bernie's the only guy up there who voted to give gun manufacturers a loophole. They couldn't be sued. I think it was 2004. It wasn't like all of a sudden.
Last night he said he regretted some of his votes on guns.
Well, yeah, he did. What's he done since then? He's out there going after every industry. Have you heard him talk about going after the gun manufacturers? He pointed out that when he ran for mayor, he lost because he supported the assault weapons ban. And then he went and ran for the United States Congress. Well, he didn't. He wasn't talking about assault weapons ban then. The guy he ran against supported the assault weapons ban. Come on, look, I think that if you're going to, I think you have to be legit in what you're saying. If I said to you that, I really care about, I've always been deeply involved in the African-American community. I come out of the civil rights movement, but by the way, I invested $90 million in a prison system that I knew hog-tied juveniles here in South Carolina, hog-tied them and held them in a private prison. That same outfit did the same thing, denying health care and adequate health for folks in the state of Georgia. And I knew it, and I invested in that company when I knew it. Is that consistent with who I say I am? I think consistency matters. What do you stand for? And it can't be bouncing around based upon what's going to get you elected. Look, I tell everybody who's ever come to me as a young candidate, say, what's the most important thing to know? Know what's worth losing over. What are you willing to lose over?
What are you willing to lose over?
I'm willing to lose over race. I'm willing to lose over health care. I'm willing to lose over the idea that we have to deal with global warming. I don't want the job. I don't want the job. And I mean it. I don't want the job if I have to go in there and say, I'm changing my position on race. I'm changing my position on guns. I'm changing my position. Sure, everybody makes mistakes and votes, but if you make a mistake and you said it was a mistake, what did you do to fix it? What have you done to change it, other than say I made a mistake? You know, Jim Clyburn, again, who you know well, says, you want to know, he always quotes Fritz Hollins, you know, if you want to know what a man will do, go back and look at what he did.
Last night you also said, and you surprised some folks by saying if elected, you would appoint a black woman to the Supreme Court. And I wanted to ask you, what about your number 2 spot? What about vice president? Have you already started to have conversations with folks?
I have not started having conversations with my folks about people that look, every time I get in this territory and I talk about it, say Biden's being awfully presumptuous, he's talking about who the vice presidential candidate is. But I think three things. One, you have to start to decide the people you choose from, because you got to do background checks on everybody. You got to go and do some thorough background checks. I've begun to think about that in terms of both women of color, Latinos, and you know, men of color, but also on others who, in fact, share my philosophic view of what to do. The one thing I've learned about, the only thing I can't comment on that I know a lot about is the vice presidency. And one of the reasons when I asked Barack why he wanted to vet me, he said because there's not a single important issue we disagreed on. We disagreed on tactics sometimes, and that's what we'd argue about privately. Sometimes he agreed with me. About 30% of the time he changed the tactic. Most of them, he's the president. But it has to be someone who I'm able to turn to if I'm president and give presidential responsibility to. And by that I mean, you can do that with cabinet to an extent. But when I went abroad or when I spoke on the things the president gave me authority over, everybody knew I was speaking as if I were the president. I had the authority to do the job. And the job is so big, there's so much that lands on your plate, that you have to have someone who you know will not just have your back, that's an important thing, but will in fact represent the same philosophic view that you have on an issue. And you don't have to constantly check.
Would Kamala Harris fit that bill?
I think so. But again, you know, I've not spoken to Kamala Harris about that, and it's presumptuous of me to do that. But I think Kamala Harris would be someone, there's a number of women.
Who else?
Well, I'm not going to, if I start that, then I'm in real trouble, okay? But I promise you, with my close associates, we're beginning to talk about it. As a matter of fact, when I talked about the court, look, I presided over the hearings, either as the chairman or the ranking member, for Ruth Bader Ginsburg, which was a great honor. I think she's first rate. With Elena Kagan, used to work for the committee, and for Sotomayor. Matter of fact, when I had a choice to ask who would privately swear me in, because we had that glitch, remember, I asked that she swear me in. And so I do think the court, the Congress, the cabinet, the White House should look like the country. I mean, I really think it matters. I think it matters. And so my expectation would be there will be significant representation across the board in everything I do, as with my campaign. I mean, it's really important, I think.
We are perhaps on the brink of a public health crisis in this country. Thousands have already died in China from the coronavirus. A White House considering appointing a czar to deal with it. What do you make of the administration's response so far to the coronavirus?
They've had no response of any consequence. As a matter of fact, all the things Barack and I put in place, Barack put in place, the president put in place, but I was part of. My executive assistant was the guy who handled the Ebola issue. We've been through this before. And we set up a special office in the White House. He got rid of the office, the president, this president, Trump. We, in fact, increased the funding for the CDC. We increased the funding for NIH to find vaccines, to find ways in which to deal with this. We increased money for hospitals to be able to get the nurses in particular hospitals and docs who, in fact, could deal with this. In that case, it was Ebola. Now, and we went abroad and stopped it abroad to keep it from coming here. What we should do is reinstate all of those things right president today. And the most important thing is have a relationship where you go to China like we did in Africa and say, look, we want to come in and take a look at what you have. We know a lot about this. We've done it before. This is a place where experience matters. I've done it. We've been there. We dealt with Ebola. This guy, this president of the United States, Trump, is going about it all wrong. Everything we put in place to guard against this kind of thing, because disease knows no border, pandemics know no border, you have to have a plan. He's dismantled. He's cut CDC. He's tried to cut the NIH funding. We should be working like the devil on vaccines now. Now. We should have been doing it. We should be working on making sure that China levels with us and we're inside seeing what's going on for their sake as well as ours.
Thank you.
Thank you.